The cold, sterile air of the HR conference room felt like a morgue. My manager, a slick 30-something named Kevin, slid a termination letter across the polished table. "Arthur," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "we're letting you go, effective immediately." I stared at the letter. The words, "poor teamwork," jumped out, a cruel, impossible joke. For 15 years at Viridian Logic, I was the institutional memory, the one who mentored junior devs and wrote the documentation no one else would. "Poor teamwork?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Kevin, I SIAM the team support system." He just shrugged, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. "The decision is final." That smirk. He had no idea what he had just done. As security escorted me past the open plan office, I saw them. Kevin was already by the main whiteboard, spouting corporate jargon about synergy and disruptive innovation. He was a PowerPoint manager, a guy whose entire technical knowledge came from TED Talks. He'd climbed the ladder by taking credit for the quiet victories of others, mostly mine. To him, I was a relic from a bygone era, a stubborn old coder who didn't fit his shiny, agile vision. He wanted loud, self-promoting rock stars, not the quiet architects who actually built the stage. My gaze fell on my team. Maria, our lead architect and my trenchmate for over a decade, caught my eye. Her expression was a cold, silent fury. She knew the truth. Then there was Leo, the prodigy we'd hired straight out of UW. A brilliant kid, but he'd freeze solid under real pressure. Just last week, I'd spent 4 hours after work calmly walking him back from the brink, helping him untangle a catastrophic bug he'd accidentally pushed to the main branch. He just stared at my empty chair, looking utterly lost. Kevin hadn't just fired an employee, he'd pulled the keystone from his own arch. Viridian Logic wasn't always this corporate jungle. It was born in a cramped Seattle office with bad coffee and brilliant minds. 15 years ago, it was just 3 of us, building the system that would become the company's entire revenue stream. We called it Project Chimera. It was a beast, a patchwork of bleeding-edge code and legacy architecture, powerful but temperamental. The other 2 co-founders cashed out years ago, leaving me as the sole architect. The one person who knew why a piece of code written in 2008 was the only thing preventing a catastrophic data cascade in our biggest client's database. I wrote the documentation, the Chimera Bible, as the junior devs called it, but the Bible was 1,000 pages long. It was easier to just ask me. Then came Kevin. He was hired from some flashy marketing firm to modernize our development culture. He saw Chimera not as our crown jewel, but as a dusty relic. He couldn't read a single line of its code, but he loved talking about replacing it. Our friction started in his mandatory synergy meetings. While he scribbled buzzwords on a whiteboard, I'd be in the corner on my laptop, silently putting out a fire in the server kernel. One day he called me out in front of the entire department. "Arthur, good of you to join us. Any thoughts? Or are we interrupting something?" I didn't look up. "Just patching a real-time billing vulnerability that could expose every client's payment info. But please, tell me more about disruptive paradigms." The room went silent. Maria stifled a laugh. Kevin's face turned crimson. That was my first official warning for a lack of collaborative spirit. He saw me as a threat. I wasn't a yes man. When he proposed his grand rewrite of Chimera, a 2-year, $10 million fantasy project, I was the one in the directors' meeting who calmly explained why his plan would bankrupt the company before they wrote a single line of functional code. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was trying to save us. But Kevin didn't hear a warning. He heard a challenge to his authority. He started building his case. Every time I stayed late to help Leo debug a critical issue, instead of attending a pointless team-building happy hour, it was documented as poor teamwork. Every time I bypassed a new, inefficient ticketing system he'd implemented to fix a client's problem directly, it was logged as insubordination. He was collecting stones to throw. My firing wasn't a sudden decision. It was a carefully planned execution. He needed me gone so his own ignorance wouldn't be so glaringly obvious. He thought by removing me he was clearing the way for his own vision. He never once considered that I wasn't the roadblock, I was the guardrail, and he had just driven the whole company straight off the cliff. I walked out of that building into the cold Seattle drizzle and didn't look back. At home, the silence was a physical weight. My work laptop, now a useless brick, sat on the kitchen table. For 15 years, my evenings were a constant hum of server alerts and late-night code reviews. Now there was just nothing. An odd sense of peace settled over me, but it was quickly chased away by a cold, calculating anger. Kevin thought he'd cut out a tumor. He had no idea he'd just performed a lobotomy on his own company. He didn't know about the cron job I'd personally written that re-indexed the legacy customer database every night at 2:17 a.m. A job that had no documentation because it was a temporary fix I implemented 8 years ago. A fix that was now the only thing keeping their entire search function from grinding to a halt. My phone buzzed. It was Maria. "He's a fool, Arthur." "A goddamn fool," she said, her voice tight with rage. There was no preamble, no "how are you?" We were past that. "What did he do now, Maria?" "He held a meeting right after you left. Called your departure a strategic realignment for enhanced synergy." I could practically hear her roll her eyes. "He said you were a bottleneck." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I was the only thing keeping the bottle from shattering. "I know. We all know," she sighed. The sound was weary. "Leo looks like he's seen a ghost. He keeps staring at your empty desk. And it gets worse. Kevin announced the new, technical lead for his Chimera rewrite." I braced myself. "Don't tell me." "Chad." She spat the name out like poison. "Of course, Chad, Kevin's golden boy." A slick-haired junior dev, whose primary skill was nodding enthusiastically during Kevin's presentations. He couldn't code his way out of a paper bag, but he knew how to say, "paradigm shift," with a straight face. "He's going to set the servers on fire," I said, not as a joke, but as a statement of fact. "We know," Maria said, her voice dropping. "That's why I'm calling. A few of us are thinking of walking. We can't work like this. It's not just loyalty to you, it's suicide." "Don't," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "Not yet. Let him have his victory. Let him stand on that stage he thinks he built. Just be ready to take notes." I paused, letting the thought form. "And Maria? Check the execution logs for the nightly re-indexing script. Just keep an eye on it." She went silent for a beat. Then, a soft, dawning horror. "Oh God, Arthur. That one." "That one," I confirmed. "I'll be waiting." The next morning, I made coffee and sat on my porch, watching the ferries glide across Puget Sound. It was the first weekday in 15 years I wasn't rushing into a crisis. I felt like a retired general watching battle plans unfold from a distant hill. At exactly 8:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Maria. Backquote, "It's starting." Backquote, I could picture it perfectly. The team, sullen and silent at their desks. Kevin, striding in with a sickeningly cheerful, "Happy Tuesday, Trailblazers!" And then, the alert. A blaring, red P1 ticket splashing across the main monitor. A system-wide slowdown. Customer complaints flooding the support queue. The search function on their main product timing out. My next text came a minute later. Backquote, "Kevin's telling Chad to dig in Bayern. Leverage his expertise. None. Chad looks like he's about to be sick." Backquote. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The betrayal wasn't just that they had fired me. The betrayal was that they were about to learn, in the most painful and public way possible, why they shouldn't have. Kevin wanted to be the star. Fine. The show was about to begin, and he was on stage, alone, with the curtain rising and the spotlight burning down. I smiled, a thin, cold curve of my lips. Mirror, solar flares, it was almost poetic. Chad, the golden boy, was blaming the sun for a problem I'd solved 8 years ago on a rainy Saturday with 3 lines of Perl script and a cron job. The script wasn't in any repository. It lived on a forgotten virtual machine, a ghost in the architecture that I alone knew how to appease. It was my digital fingerprint, and now it was smudging their whole operation into a blurry mess. My phone buzzed again. Maria. Kevin just came out of the VP meeting. He looks pale. He's gathered everyone at the whiteboard and is drawing diagrams. They look like spaghetti. I could picture it perfectly. Kevin, waving his hands, spewing buzzwords like holistic analysis and deep dive diagnostics, while the system he was in charge of was actively drowning. He was a lifeguard who couldn't swim, lecturing on the theory of buoyancy as the tide came in. The team would be looking at him, then at Chad, then at my empty chair, the missing piece of the puzzle staring them right in the face. I walked inside and watered my orchid, a plant that required patience and precise care, qualities Kevin wouldn't recognize. The problem wasn't a sudden failure. It was a slow decay I had been manually reversing every single night. The reindexing job didn't just speed up searches. It prevented a cascade of data fragmentation. Without it, every query was now a Herculean effort for the servers, a search for a needle in a haystack that was also on fire. Another text. A screenshot this time. A graph showing server CPU utilization. It was a solid block of red, pegged at 100%. Below it, a message from Maria. They're talking about a full system rollback. To yesterday. They don't realize the problem will just happen again. Of course they didn't. Rolling back would do nothing. The decay was inherent. The fix was external. My fix. I felt a surge, not of joy, but of profound, righteous vindication. They hadn't just fired a coder, they'd fired their own immune system. Now the infection was running rampant, and the so-called doctors were trying to cure it with inspirational posters. My phone didn't buzz this time. It rang. A full, piercing ring that cut through the quiet of my house. I looked at the screen. It wasn't Maria, it was Leo. The prodigy. The brilliant kid I'd saved from himself just last week. He was breaking ranks. The panic had to be absolute for him to make that call. I let it ring once more, then answered, my voice perfectly level. Hello, Leo? Arthur? Oh, thank God. Leo's voice was a choked whisper, thin and strained, the sound of a man speaking from a hiding place. I could hear the sterile echo of a bathroom. They're going to fire me. They're going to fire all of us. Breathe, Leo, I said, my voice as calm as the gray waters of the Sound outside my window. Panic is a luxury you can't afford right now. Tell me what's happening. It's everything. The search index is corrupt. Support tickets are through the roof. Arthur, Chad tried to manually rebuild the primary search cache. He almost wiped the live user data for our biggest client. My blood ran cold. The sheer, breathtaking incompetence. That cache was tied directly to the live billing system. Wiping it wouldn't just break the search, it could halt every single transaction. Did anyone stop him? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. Maria did. He breathed. She physically unplugged his keyboard. Kevin saw the whole thing. He just pulled Chad into his office. He's in a meeting with the VP of Engineering right now. They're talking about bringing in an outside consultant. They think it's a cyber attack. A consultant. They would pay a stranger a fortune to diagnose a problem I could fix in 90 seconds. The irony was so thick I could taste it. This was my opening. Not just to be right, but to rewrite the terms of my own execution. It's not an attack, Leo, I said, letting the silence hang for a moment. Listen to me very carefully. This isn't a bug in the code, and it's not a hardware failure. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, but a piece of its maintenance routine is missing. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. A maintenance routine? But we've checked all the automated scripts in the repository. We've checked the schedulers on the main servers. You're looking in the wrong place, I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. You're looking for something new. You need to be looking for something old. Something that was put in place as a temporary fix a long, long time ago, before Kevin's modern deployment pipelines, before we even used Git for that part of the system. I let him connect the dots. I was giving him a riddle, not an answer. I was arming him, not them. It's not on the main servers, Leo. It lives somewhere else. A ghost. A ghost? Oh my God, he whispered. The old VM cluster. The one you kept running for the legacy data imports. I'm not confirming or denying anything, I said smoothly. I'm just a guy who got fired for poor teamwork. I don't have access to your systems anymore. I let that statement land, a stark reminder of their monumental blunder. What do I do? He pleaded. If I go to Kevin with this, he'll just take credit or say I'm making it up. Exactly, I said. This was the critical move. So you don't go to Kevin. You are not to speak to Kevin about this call. You will go to Maria. You tell her everything I've just told you. She's been there long enough to know what I'm talking about. She has the political capital to survive the fallout. Let her be the one to discover it. I was building a new chain of command, one forged in competence, bypassing the weak link entirely. I was making Maria the hero, and by extension, making my own value undeniable. Okay, Leo said, his voice steadier now, a hint of steel returning. Okay, I can do that. Arthur. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I cut in, my tone shifting from mentor to businessman. There's one more thing, Leo. When Maria finds the problem, she's going to realize she can't fix it. No one can. The access credentials for that machine were tied to my profile, the one they deactivated yesterday. A long silence on the other end of the line. He understood. When they realize that, I continued, my voice now cold and clear, and they will realize it very soon, they are going to want to call me. You can tell Maria that I am available for emergency contract work. Contract work? I am no longer an employee of Viridian Logic. I'm a private consultant. My rate is $750 an hour, with a 20-hour minimum, paid up front. That is non-negotiable. I had decided the price on the spot. It felt right. It was punitive, insulting, and utterly necessary. Leo was speechless. I could hear the dawning realization in his silence. This wasn't about help. This was about retribution. You're a good kid, Leo. I finished, my voice softening just a fraction. You got caught in the crossfire. Now go talk to Maria. And stay off Kevin's radar. I hung up before he could reply. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. I had just laid a trap, baited with their own desperation. I hadn't solved their problem. I had simply illuminated the cage they had built for themselves, and then I'd shown them that I held the only key. 10 minutes passed. My phone buzzed. A text from Maria. Backquote, Leo just found me. He looks like he's seen a ghost and an angel at the same time. I'm heading to the old server room now. Call you when I confirm. Backquote. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. I sat in the quiet of my home, a general on a hill, watching the smoke rise from a battle I had started without firing a single shot. The next move wasn't mine to make. I was no longer a player in their game. I was the board itself, and they were about to find out how much it cost to play. The phone would ring again. It was only a matter of time. The wait wasn't long. 45 minutes, to be exact. Enough time to brew a second pot of coffee and watch a fat raven mock a squirrel from a telephone wire. Then, my phone lit up. It was a text from Maria. Backquote, found it. Old V cluster, just like you said. VM name, Prometheus. Cute. Can't get in. Access is hard-coded to your admin credentials. They're gone. Back quote, Prometheus. The titan who stole fire from the gods and was punished for it. I smiled. I was feeling a lot less like the titan and a lot more like the eagle sent to peck out his liver. Back quote, I'm going in. Back quote, her next text read. Back quote, to the VP's office. Back quote. I didn't have a seat at their table anymore, but through Maria's texts, I had a ghost's view of the chaos. She described walking into the main conference room, now a makeshift quote-quote war room. The VP of Engineering, David Chen, a man who usually only emerged for budget meetings, was at the head of the table, his face a grim mask. Kevin was frantically trying to draw a new flowchart on the whiteboard, his back to the door. Chad was sitting in a corner, staring at his shoes, looking like a child who had broken a priceless vase. Maria laid it out calmly. The problem wasn't a hack. It wasn't a server failure. It was a missing process. A legacy script running on a forgotten virtual machine. A machine only one person had maintained. A machine no one could now access. According to Maria's text, Kevin tried to spin it. This is exactly what I was talking about. Unsanctioned, undocumented processes. This is why we need to modernize. David Chen, a man whose patience had clearly evaporated hours ago, turned on him. His voice, Maria relayed, was dangerously quiet. Kevin, this unsanctioned process was the only thing keeping our biggest revenue stream online. You fired the only man who knew it existed. So right now, your opinion on modernization is not required. A text from Maria simply said, back quote, he shut up, back quote. I savored that for a moment. Kevin, silenced not by a technical argument, but by the cold, hard reality of his own failure. He had built his throne on a foundation of buzzwords, and the first real storm had washed it all away. Then, the final text came. Back quote, David is going to call you. Don't go easy on him. Back quote. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang, displaying the main number for Viridian Logic. I let it ring 3 times, a small act of psychological warfare. Then I answered, my voice a carefully crafted monotone. Arthur Finch speaking. Arthur. It's David Chen. He sounded exhausted. The forced cordiality in his voice was stretched thin, like cheap plastic wrap. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Nothing that can't wait, David, I replied, staring out at the gray Seattle sky. Good. Good. An awkward pause. Listen, Arthur, we have a situation here. It seems there's an issue with an old maintenance script. One of yours, I believe. Kevin's restructuring seems to have had some unforeseen consequences. He was trying to pin it on Kevin, to create a common enemy. I wasn't biting. I am no longer an employee, David. Your internal restructuring is not my concern. Of course, he stammered. But we need your help. We're dead in the water. We need you to come in and fix it. For old time's sake. David. I interrupted, my voice turning to ice. The time for pleasantries was over. Let me be very clear. Old time's sake ended when your manager handed me a termination letter for poor teamwork. I am no longer part of the team. I am a private consultant. The silence on his end was profound. I could hear the faint, frantic typing of keyboards in the background, the sound of his company burning. I am available for emergency contract work, I continued, pressing my advantage. My rate is $750 an hour. I heard a sharp intake of breath. 750? With a 20-hour minimum retainer, I added, twisting the knife. Payable in advance. That's $15,000, David. Wire transfer. I will begin work once the funds have cleared in my account. 15,000? Up front? Arthur, that's insane. Is it? I asked calmly. You can call your accounting department and get a precise number for how much this outage is costing you per hour. I suspect it's quite a bit more than my fee. My offer is non-negotiable. I could picture him in that room, the other executives staring, Kevin looking on in impotent fury. He was trapped. Every second he argued with me, the hole they were in got deeper and more expensive. He sighed, a long, shuddering sound of complete and utter defeat. "Fine. Send me your wire information." "I just did," I said, having already emailed it from my phone. "I'll be monitoring my account. Once the transfer is confirmed, I will remote in." I didn't disconnect the call. I just set the phone down on the table, letting the open line broadcast the sound of my quiet, unhurried existence into their war room. The silence was my weapon. For 23 agonizing minutes, David Chen was paying for the privilege of listening to me do absolutely nothing. Finally, a notification chimed on my laptop. The wire transfer. $15,000. I picked up the phone. "The funds are confirmed, David. I'm beginning my work." "Thank God," he breathed. "How long will this take?" "It already took 15 years and 23 minutes, I said, my voice flat. "The rest is easy." I opened a secure terminal, the familiar black screen with its green text, a comforting sight. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a flurry of commands committed to muscle memory. I navigated to the forgotten virtual machine, Prometheus. I reactivated my old service account, reset the cron job, and with a single command, triggered the re-indexing script manually. The whole process took less than 90 seconds. On the other end of the line, I heard a sudden cheer erupt in the background. Maria's voice cut through the noise. "It's working! Search latency is dropping. System load is normalizing." David came back on the line, his relief palpable. "Arthur, it's fixed, thank you." I'm not finished," I cut in, my voice sharp enough to slice through his gratitude. "I've emailed you an invoice for the first hour of my 20-hour retainer. I've also attached a one-page document." "A document?" "I call it the ghost list," I said. Prometheus was not an anomaly. It was the first one to fail. There are 17 other undocumented, mission-critical processes like it, baked into the core of Chimera. Patches I wrote to stop data corruption, workarounds for hardware flaws, security plugs that aren't in any repository. They are all tied to my credentials. They will all fail, David. It's just a matter of when. Quote, "The silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't the silence of panic. It was the silence of dawning, abject horror. The remaining 19 hours of my retainer can be used to begin the process of properly documenting and migrating these ghosts." I continued smoothly. "After which, we can discuss a new, more comprehensive consulting agreement. Or you can hang up, wait for the next fire, and call me again. The price will be double. The choice is yours." I hung up, leaving him to stare at the list of ticking time bombs I had just handed him. The money was satisfying, but this was victory. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been the unappreciated glue for a team, and they only realized your true value after you were gone?